Sunbelt Business Advisors is offering to our clients. Many of you have been on before, but these webcast presentations are really here to inform business owners that when the time is right for you to move on to your next venture or retirement, you're going to be better positioned to minimize taxes and maximize what you walk away with. So hopefully, if you've missed any in the past, you can go on to our webpage under webinars, and we have, I believe, 6 or 7 others that might be helpful to you. I'm Joan Young, the president of Sunbelt Business Advisors, and today I'm going to be covering the ins and outs of earnouts. Feel free to enter your questions in the chat box at the bottom of the screen on the left. We'll be leaving around 10 minutes open at the end of the webinar to cover any of those questions that we can in that allotted time. If you do not get your questions in, feel free to call me directly, and my information will be on the last slide. So let's start with really what is an earnout? Definitely it may be a useful tool in many transactions for bridging the gap in perception of business value. You can imagine a seller may think it's worth one thing and a buyer thinks it's worth another, and it is just that wonderful gap that helps out. It's common in many larger transactions as a portion of the purchase consideration. And it's definitely for a way for a buyer and seller to agree to disagree, and it really helps the business continue to move forward rather than getting stuck at a disagreement on the purchase price. So an example of an earnout would be possibly, let's say, a seller believes the value of the company is worth $5 million or more, and the purchaser believes the selling company is worth $4 million. So there's a $1 million gap, and that can be bridged by the purchaser offering a fixed purchase price of $4 million with an earn-out provision allowing the seller to potentially earn up to the maximum aggregate purchase price of $5 million or more. But that is after the sale. So if the business performs in a manner in which a certain agreed upon financial or non-financial target is met, or exceeded over agreed upon part of time. So basically an earnout, the definition is a contractual provision stating that the seller of a business is to obtain additional future compensation based on the business achieving certain financial goals. And remember, that is with, you need to have target agreed upon formulas that must be met, and that has to be during a specific amount of time, which we'll be getting to. So it really does earnouts protect purchasers that don't want to overpay for a business and sellers that do not want to leave money on the table. So in appropriate transactions, it can really create a win-win situation that enables deals to get done that might not get done before. Okay, let's look at the benefits to a buyer. If you have a very aggressive earnout in your offer, it could trump any competing offers. In fact, I just had a transaction like this where the letter of intent, and it was in the millions business. This typically isn't done for small businesses. But the buyer had a very attractive purchase price. It was for a little more than the asking price, and he was very loose about how it was going to get paid. He said it would be with cash, it would be with a note, and a possible earnout to get there, but he didn't say what it was. So, of course, the seller took it off the market, dealt with that buyer, and we just closed. So, it made it attractive to the seller, and it helped the buyer not have to compete. It can also lower your initial cash investment. So instead of having to pay that $5 million, you were able to leverage it and have the other $1 million paid if it met the criteria that we outlined. The third point as an advantage, it can motivate the owner or seller to stay on with the business to ensure the future success. So if you're the type of seller that wants to get out of there in 2 to 4 weeks, an earnout would not be appropriate for you, because if you have a healthy earnout, you definitely want to be around to influence the future performance of your company, definitely. And some have, stayed on for a year, others have stayed on for 3 years, and even longer than that. It really depends on the size of the company, who is the purchasing party. Is it a private equity group who's going to bring in a managing partner to do it? Is it an individual investor or a strategic investor, which could be someone in the same industry that's wanting to bring it into their company? The other advantage for a buyer is you're getting this money internally financed. So let's say after a year, when the first earnout payment is due by the buyer, and the money may be, let's say $100,000 may be owed, and he doesn't have all that at one time. Typically, sellers will internally finance it using the assets of the company or the profits of the company to secure it. So you're not necessarily, as a buyer, having to come up with all of that money at once. And again, there are as many different ways of doing earnouts as there are transactions. It's all very individual and very creative. Another advantage to a buyer in wanting to do an earnout, you pay in tomorrow's dollars, which is typically less than today's dollars due to inflation. So you're able to, if you're able to get a buyer to agree to this, then it can be better for you financially. Now let's look at the seller's benefits. It definitely, if you're a seller and somebody offers you money for future earnings, it definitely shows the buyer that you feel very good about the future of your company. You know it because you as a seller have been running it. You know what your contracts look like. You know your employees are safe and sound and going to stay put, and you do need to feel very safe about the future before you would agree to one of these. But it definitely makes a buyer feel warm and fuzzy by you doing that. It also allows a seller to get a higher price for the business than it might get throughout a traditional sale. I have seen transactions that would not have happened without an earnout because there was so much doubt about what was happening in the future due to many things that we'll touch on. Let's look at the disadvantages of an earnout. We've talked about the advantages to the buyer and now advantages just to the seller. Now let's look at overall disadvantages. There's definitely many ways for a seller to be harmed and lose some or all of the potential earnout. Purchasers definitely may be tempted to somehow hinder the performance of the business post-closing or even manipulate the correct measures of such performances in order to reduce or eliminate earnout payments. And that's why it is so important in an earnout for the seller to stay on board so he can control this, and also to have your contract be so tight, exactly step by step how everything's going to be done. For example, your financial reporting. Once the new purchaser comes in and takes over the business, your financial reporting must be done in the exact same way as it's been before. And the contract's going to specify exactly how it's going to be done. This is where attorneys and accountants will come in very helpful to you in working as a team to get all those points worked out. The risk can definitely be minimized by permitting the seller to either retain some control over the business post-closing or establish in advance parameters for post-closing operations. So I think we've talked about some of those. Number two is another disadvantage could be demotivating, or I guess it's three, demotivating the seller management personnel. If let's say after the first 12 months, that incentive goes away because they've missed the target. So that's one of the reasons why you don't want a short-term earnout of just 12 months, because if they did miss it, then the people staying on might be de-incentivized. You know what I mean. Incentivized. What's the word I want? And then the next one is involves a significant continued relationship between the buyer and the seller. So if you're not particularly fond of the person buying your company, think about how you'd like to work with them for 3 years. because that's often the average time that an earnout is done, is for 3 years. Anywhere really from about 18 months to 5 years, but 3 years is the average. So you better like working with them. You need to be on the same page and really have the same goals in mind. So that risky structure, a disadvantage or a deterrent, is a short period of time. So that the 18 to 5 years is the average. Okay? So appropriate transactions for an earnout. You'll notice number 2 bullet, it says $3 million to $500 million deals often will have an earnout. So this isn't for your $200,000 to $400,000 transactions typically, unless there's some unusual situation where they possibly had a real spike in earnings one year, and let's say it was in 2010, and 2011 a buyer's looking to buy your business, and he sees that it's gone from $300,000 pretty much up until 2010, and then it went up to $500,000. They're not necessarily going to pay you for the $500,000 that happened that one year unless you have some really good reasons why it happened. So then they will say, let's maybe take an average and assume that 400 is going to be the average, and then you will make the extra 100 as your earnout possibly. Okay. Then hands-off management by purchasers. That could be, I mentioned before, that private equity groups could be purchasing these larger companies. And that's when the purchaser may be hands-off, the private equity group, but they're going to bring in a manager to run the business for them. And that would be an appropriate transaction to maybe do this. But I would say probably number 3 and 4 are the 2 top reasons why someone may be doing an earnout. And that's the uncertainty of the future, what's happening in the economy, and I think then there's more willingness to take the wait-and-see option offered by an earnout structured acquisition. I've definitely also seen them, when there is a great fluctuation in the revenues and earnings. So like I said about that spike, that could play a part. So that concentration of client base. Years ago we had a transaction that 70% of the revenue was with one client. That made the buyer a bit nervous about going forward, even though the company had that client for 10 years, a new person coming in. One of the things that made them feel comfortable is definitely having an employment agreement for 3 years, and one of the conditions was adding new clients as far as the earnout condition, as well as the revenues continuing to increase. And I will show you an example at the end of our webinar on how that exactly worked. Okay? So those are pretty much the appropriate ones, not the businesses that have stayed tried and true, typically not franchises unless some big spike in 2010 and they're selling it in 2011. But just remember, this is for bigger transactions. Okay, setting realistic expectations. I think being equipped with solid expectations for your business success over the next 3 to 5 years is very important, so that you can well prepare for negotiating an earnout. So if you've been seeing growth in your company, and then you will feel, and you know that you've been increasing, 8 to 10% every year, and you have some good clients heading into the future, you're probably not going to feel very nervous about that. But just know what your company has, how many new contracts are coming, so that you can feel comfortable with that. Consider what proportion of the asking price you're willing to risk and work for in the future. Remember, if you're not going to be involved in the company post-closing, this won't be something that you feel very comfortable with. In fact, I have many sellers say now, I'm going to rely on getting more money for my business when I'm not involved in it, and it's a new guy taking over that's never been in this industry before makes them feel a little, makes sellers feel a little uncertain. So you need to decide what portion of it are you willing to risk. And if your company meets or exceeds targeted goals now, this fact will give you definitely added negotiating power, that you may not have to do as large of an earnout if you can show them this is what we've been doing. Why would it not continue, especially with you on board? Because most earnout clauses are tied to the company's performances, and by the way, that's usually measured by sales or some other benchmark over the 3 to 5 year period, that's definitely the time that you should be thinking about your company's health before embarking on negotiations. Okay, let's look at how we properly structure an earnout. I'd say you can't emphasize this enough. Keep it simple. I'm going to show you a simple earnout at the end, and I'm going to show you a much more complicated one. And those don't even touch the complicated ones that absolutely can be drawn up. So it's going to just scare the buyer and the seller if it's not structured simply. There's just too many variables out of your hand and out of control. So you want your legal and financial advisors to fight for a simple deal with an earnout based on an easy-to-quantify metrics, such as higher revenues or an expanded client base. I definitely recommend basing your earnout on revenues versus net profit or adjusted net profit. It's just too easy to play games with the other and add new expenses that weren't there before. So, and I think with aligned incentives and clear objectives with your buyer, you're going to have less cost for arguing, and you don't want it to get to be a legal matter down the road. And you need to have also the time frame for achievement for the earnout metrics in this, and I think I said 3 years. So let's look at the different performance metrics and milestones that may be included. And there could be many more than this. But revenue growth of the business. Remember, that's probably the reason why this earnout is being done, because they're going to they don't want to overpay for your business. So they're going to say, okay, I'll pay you extra if the revenues reach that. Net profits is another way that people often will do it, typically for much bigger businesses, 50 million, 100 million businesses, it could be on net profits. Cash flow measures, increase in earnings per share for stock purchases, new product launch. If a buyer is looking at your business and you've been saying, oh, yeah, next year we're going to have this new widget that's coming out and we're so excited about it, it should double our revenue, just that is going to be part of the earnout, is if that product is launched, then I will pay you that extra money. Level of capacity utilization. So let's say your company is working at 50% capacity. There's so much more upside potential, whether somebody adds another shift with your company, whether you could add new divisions, you could add more product lines. There's going to be much more upside potential, and so that could be one of the metrics that they use, that if a new product was launched or knew that they would definitely pay more for it. And like I mentioned in the transaction that 70% of the revenue is with one client, that is begging for an earnout in that case, because a buyer is not going to pay for what you've done, which could, if that client decided to go elsewhere or to do business offshore, then they've definitely overpaid for that company. Okay? So gross sales are better to use as a metrics versus net sales, since expenses are easy to manipulate and distort. So, you definitely want to make sure that the same systems are going to be used going forward that you were using to ensure this to be not a problem in the future. So how do we determine the length of an earnout? Definitely, if you make it too short for a year, I know some people say, well, this new product is going to be launched within the next 6 months, so let's just make an earn-out for 6 months. Well, if you make it too short, it can affect the long-term health of the company. Maybe something new has to be purchased for the company for long-term growth, and that might be put off, and that could affect the long term. So you don't want it too short, and you don't want it too long, because it'll fail to achieve the purpose of the earn-out. So, you know, there could be downturns in, I think we all know that downturns in cycles of different industries. The semiconductor industry changes about every 7 years. What if your buyer purchased in the 6th year at the height, and then it dropped? So they have to take that into account too. And there is such a thing as an accelerated payout. So a seller can accelerate the earn-out payment for certain provisions if certain events happen. I haven't seen it happen. I really haven't been involved in one of these, but I know it has happened where, let's say, the purchaser of your company ended up selling the business early. And the earn-out, you know, he didn't have time to do it. Your earn-out could be due because he's changed the way the business was running. Or let's say he was just really trying to get out of it, and he sold some very important equipment that was necessary to grow your company. That could be an acceleration provision. But just know that simplicity is the key for the seller. You need to stay true to your priorities as a business owner is equally important. So sure, if you believe strongly in your company's potential and want to guide its success through new ownership, an earn-out really might give you the opportunity to do so. But ensuring that a few key elements are in place in your agreement can greatly strengthen this new arrangement. Let's look at some of those. So you need to keep your key players in place. I talked to a potential seller just the other day, and he was telling us that there's 3 partners in the business. One of the partners is going to be going back to school to get his master's. He's leaving. The other one has already left. He was the sales guy, and you know, all of a sudden, the value of his business is has been lowered because of his company's changing. And for a new owner to come in and get all new people is really going to be a detriment to you. So keep your key players. And you'll be able to see on our last webinar, we talked about how to keep your employees and have a possible stay bonus. So you may want to look at that. But there's many different ways that you can make it very attractive for your employees, especially your key management, to stay on board, where you're going to reward them from a percentage of the close. And it could be a flat fee, it could be a percentage, but trust me, it's going to make it well worth your while to reward them for staying, and it's going to help the earn-out get paid as well. So keep the length of your employment contract as short as possible. So let's say the earn-out was for 5 years. I don't think many of you on the phone that are potential sellers want to continue working 5 years after you sell the business. I mean, you wouldn't be selling it if you didn't want to move on. So you can always change it for additional time, but you can't undo what you agreed to at closing. So I would say a transaction that we just closed, 1 year he was staying on 1 year full-time, second year 20 hours a week, third year 15 hours a week, which is a way to ease out the company's going to be working smoothly by then. The new purchaser is going to feel more comfortable taking over, but he still is there to keep his eye on the ball so he can ensure that he's getting paid on his earn-out. You want to make sure, if you have an earn-out, that you are going to stay in control. That's sort of self-explanatory. Ensure that incentives are in place. You know what motivates you at work right now, don't you? So one is seeing your business succeed, and the second one is probably money. So if you've had a lot of cash, if you've made a lot of cash in the initial sale, it's natural definitely to lose attachment to future goals for the company. So the earn-out percentage should be high enough to keep you from losing interest, especially in the event of a setback. So if you're going to commit, I want you to commit fully. Okay, let's look how taxes can be differently treated in an earn-out. Definitely earn-outs will qualify for the installment method of taxation. So typically, you're not paying the IRS on that payment until you get paid. So it will kind of string it out a little bit so you don't have to pay it all at once, and that can be an advantage to many people. So will the purchaser, let's see, sorry. Okay, we're now, okay, we're ready for ensuring success of an earn-out. Okay, will the purchaser have enough self-sufficiency? Earn-outs really tend to work well when the seller is going to continue to run pretty much as before, like we discussed. A seller should get in writing the buyer's commitment to leave operations largely unchanged. So if sellers' back office functions are to be folded into the acquiring company, that's fine. You simply want to make sure that every part of the acquired company that can be run independently is run independently. So that's something to remember. And definitely remember the purpose of an earn-out. An earn-out can be made for purely financial reasons, or a buyer can be making a bet on the owner's ability to expand the business. So you'll want to know which motivation is at play and whether it's likely to change after the deal's closed. So if the buyer is keeping a respectful distance and seems to be giving you the reins to go with, it's a very good sign. So how is progress evaluated at an earn-out? So remember, you're continuing on, and the buyer is hopefully working and learning the business as you go, and it can be evaluated at the end of the year, the first year. It could be in the second year and third year, or it could be done quarterly. It's just you just need to be able to agree upon at the signing of the agreement how it is going to be tracked. Some people do it even quarterly. And will the earn-out be allotted piecemeal or in that one large sum? There's really no right answer to this, but these questions definitely need to be addressed early in the negotiations. So what will happen if outside factors come into play? Factors in neutral party control can harm the buyer's and entrepreneur's ability to maximize the rewards pledged in an earn-out. So what if the industry tanks? What if there's a natural disaster? Make sure to create contingencies plans to address the most unlikely of scenarios, especially if you're entering into a long-term earn-out deal. Okay? So let's look at a few examples, and there are only two examples of an earn-out. The first one is a simple earn-out, which is for a much smaller, well, but not necessarily, this one wasn't, but it's not a $5 million, $20 million deal. So remember, the earn-outs, an additional earn-out shall be paid to seller, typically 30 days after that 1-year anniversary at change of possession if the gross revenues of the business maintains at least 80% of the previous 12 months. So that was very generous in this particular condition. So they must have gotten pretty much what they wanted at for the sale. So let's look how they did it. The gross revenue target number will be calculated on all revenues less landscaping, labor, and materials. Okay, if revenues come in below that level, the earn-out will be discounted $2 for every $1 shortfall. So that business must have been sold for a 2 times multiple, and so that's how they came up with that. So here's how it was set up. $1,645,000, the earn-out will be paid as follows. And so he got 100%, or $100,000, if they reached that amount. If it was 90% of that set matrix of 1,645,619, they would get, let's see, 90%, he got $80,000, and if it was 80%, he got $60,000. That's about as easy it can get. Set a matrix, set a firm number of what needs to be met, and that could even be what had been done the previous year. So let's say 2010, the landscaping company did $1.6 million, and so they were saying, okay, if it stays that way, I will give you an extra earn-out payment, and they set it this way. Now let's look one a little bit more complicated. So this second example, there were 2 thresholds for earn-out within the first year. The first 12 months was if the gross revenues equaled $1.9 million, and I like how this was done because they said plus or minus $20,000. They're not going to nickel and dime each other. They said if it's within that range, then they will get an extra $50,000. And then they had another one that if gross revenues hit $2.1 million, he would get another $50,000. So in that first year, there was a potential of making an extra $100,000 earn out. And then the second paragraph, it describes the second 12-month period. This earn out was really only for 2 years. And by the way, 150 earn out was earned in this. So it says in the second 12-month period, and by the way, it says of the employment agreement, so the seller was asked to stay on. This was the manufacturing company I was describing, and he really stayed on for 3 years, but the earn-out was for 2. So in the second 12 months, gross revenues increased by $300,000 plus or minus $10,000. Over the second 12-month period, he would earn $50K. If it got up to $550,000 additional revenue, he would make an extra $50,000. So the possible earn-out was for $200,000 additional. But then there was also a clause in the third paragraph which ensured that if it fell below, and this was to protect the buyer. So if the revenues fell below $1.4 million, it was protected by the promissory note. So the seller not only had an earn-out where he could make more money, he was also carrying a note to protect in case it went below this amount. So if it went below $1.4 million, I believe it's $1 for each, let's see, promissory note reduced by $1 for each dollar below that threshold, up to a maximum reduction of $100,000. And then, so that was pretty much the way this one worked. So it was protected if it went below, and by a promissory note, and it covered the first and second year. So hopefully that gave you a pretty good idea of that there are so many different ways that earn-outs could be done. They work for some situations and not for others, and some sellers absolutely will not even consider it, and others that's really the only way the company will probably sell. So we have some questions here. We do. Yeah, it was more of a question of another way for earn-outs to be designed, and I think I'd rather, for time's sake, and since there's so many variables, if you could just call me on the Sunbelt line, I'd be more than glad to go over your particular situation and how that could be affected. So thank you so much for being on with us today, and please feel free to call if you need any additional help when you are ready to move on to retirement or some other venture. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.